excusez, Monsieur Gaudert et Madame Leboutillier. Mr. Blair.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. I also want to begin, if you'll indulge me with a moment's reflection. This is a very important day. I've spent most of my adult life protecting children and keeping communities safe. And from experience, I know that the use of cannabis among our young people is among the highest in the world. I believe that we have to do a better job of protecting our kids. I'm also aware from 4 decades of police work that this is a business overwhelmingly controlled by organized crime, and the profits of that criminal enterprise do no good in any of our communities. And so I'm very proud that our government has committed to doing a better job of protecting our kids and to take the profits out of organized crime while also ensuring the health of all our citizens. Too many of our kids currently have access to cannabis, and we know that criminal prohibition has failed to protect our kids and our communities, and we need a new approach. That is why we are pleased to be here with you today to announce that our government is taking decisive action to strictly regulate and restrict access to cannabis and to toughen our impaired driving laws. Protecting the health and safety of Canadians is a priority for our government. Despite decades of criminal prohibition, Canadians, including 21% of our youth and 30% of young adults, continue to use cannabis at among the highest rates in the world. That cannabis is grown and sold illegally, profiting criminals and organized crime with no regard for its potency, purity, or provenance. The proposed legislation which is introduced today seeks to legalize, strictly regulate, and restrict access to cannabis, and it will make Canada safer. It will impose serious criminal penalties for those who provide cannabis to young people, create a legal and regulated market for cannabis to take the profits out of the hands of criminals and organized crime, and it will protect public health through strict product requirements for safety and quality. In order to further protect Canadians, our government has committed to creating new and stronger laws to punish more severely those who drive while impaired by cannabis, alcohol, and other drugs. Impaired driving is the leading cause of death and injury in Canada. Minister Wilson-Raybould will have more to say in a few moments about how the proposed legislation will strengthen our existing drug-impaired driving laws, create new criminal offences in this area, and make our alcohol-impaired driving laws simpler, more coherent, and easier to enforce. The proposed cannabis legislation is informed by the recommendations made by our task force on cannabis legalization and regulation, which was led by the Honourable Anne McClellan. I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge and thank them for their exceptionally hard work, and to all Canadians and experts who shared their experience and expertise and evidence with us in formulating the recommendations upon which we act today. I'd also like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the extraordinary support that we have received from public servants in the ministries of Justice, Health, and Public Safety. It's a remarkable team of very hardworking and dedicated individuals who have and will continue to inform this very important work to keep our kids and our communities safer. This proposed legislation is robust and well informed by the input of our task force and experts in many fields, including those from public health, justice, public safety, and problematic substance use. We also heard from over 30,000 Canadians who provided input on an online portal, as well as many experts from fields that I previously mentioned. In the weeks and months ahead, our government will continue to engage collaboratively with our provinces, territories, and municipalities, as well as our Indigenous partners, as we all share responsibility in implementing cannabis legalization and regulations. Thank you all very much, and I'll now turn you over to Minister Philpott.
Thank you very much, Parliamentary Secretary Blair. Bon après-midi. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Secrétaire parlementaire Blair. Today is an important day. It's not just about taking action on illegal cannabis markets. It is also, as the Parliamentary Secretary has said, about protecting the health of Canadians and, most importantly, the health of our youth. Le projet de loi du gouvernement vise à prévenir l'utilisation du cannabis par les jeunes. Youth are at the centre of the government's actions to regulate and restrict access to cannabis. The proposed legislation introduces severe penalties for those who sell or give cannabis to youth. It also restricts the advertising and promotion of cannabis so as not to appeal to youth. This is because cannabis is not without risk. While it is used therapeutically by some, it can pose health risks. Youth are especially vulnerable to the effects of cannabis on brain development and function because their brains are still developing. Nous savons que plus une personne est jeune au moment de commencer à consommer du cannabis et plus elle en consomme souvent, plus les risques globaux pour la santé sont grands. Yet youth are also less likely than adults to see cannabis use as a significant risk to health. That is why we support public education, and as announced in Budget 2017, we have committed $9.6 million to inform youth, adults, and parents of the risks of cannabis use. This campaign has already started and will continue over the next 5 years. Nous sommes convaincus que nos mesures contribueront à protéger la santé et la sécurité de tous les Canadiens grâce à une approche de santé publique vise à réglementer et à restreindre de façon rigoureuse l'accès au cannabis. Thank you. I will now ask Minister Wilson-Raybould to say a few words.
Well, thank you, Minister Philpott, and good afternoon, everyone. I am also very pleased to be here along with my colleagues and Parliamentary Secretary Blair. This is an important day. And just before I explain the government's intent to strengthen the impaired driving laws in anticipation of the legalization of cannabis, I would like to reiterate that driving while impaired by drugs is and will remain illegal. Driving while impaired by drugs or alcohol is a major contributor to fatal road crashes in Canada. And young people who test positive for alcohol or drugs continue to be the largest group of drivers killed in motor vehicle accidents. The amendments we have proposed today would build on existing criminal law and provincial and territorial measures by, among other changes, authorizing the police to use oral fluid screening devices and creating 3 new driving offenses of being over the legal limit of impaired drugs. The police would be authorized to demand an oral fluid sample if they have reasonable suspicion that the driver has drugs in their body. A positive result would provide them with useful information in determining whether or not they have reasonable grounds to demand either a blood sample or a drug evaluation at the police station. This legislation would also introduce significant reforms to the area of alcohol-impaired driving, including, for example, mandatory alcohol screening to ensure that drivers that are over the legal limits for alcohol will have a greater likelihood of being caught. The legislation would also contribute to efficiencies in the criminal justice system, including by facilitating the proof of blood alcohol concentration and eliminating or restricting the defenses that encourage risky behavior. The Government of Canada is committed to the safety of our roads and highways. We will continue to work with our provincial and territorial partners on other issues remaining in terms of impaired driving and road safety. We will also continue to work with law enforcement and to inform the public about the changes to the law and the dangers of driving while using drugs or alcohol. I will now turn it over to my colleague, Minister Goodale.
Thank you very much, colleagues. If your objective is to protect public health and safety and keep cannabis out of the hands of minors and stop the flow of illegal profits to organized crime, then the law as it stands today has been an abject failure. Police forces spend between $2 and $3 billion every year trying to deal with cannabis, yet Canadian teenagers are among the heaviest users in the Western world. And criminals pocket $7 to $8 billion in illicit proceeds. We simply have to do better. Since day one, health and public safety objectives have been at the forefront of our approach to cannabis. The legislation we have introduced today reflects that, and it will do a better job of protecting our kids and fighting crime. We have benefited from the thorough, balanced, and thoughtful advice of an expert task force Our legislation is in line with their recommendations. We will come down hard on illegal cannabis businesses of drug dealers and organized crime. Law enforcement will be focused on serious offenses like trafficking cannabis to children and youth and driving under the influence of drugs. Drug-impaired driving puts at risk the lives and safety of drivers and passengers every single day. And we will lead a wide-ranging campaign to raise awareness of the dangers of driving while impaired. Most importantly, the proposed legislation will provide more tools and stronger laws to punish more severely drivers under the influence of drugs, including cannabis. The legislation would allow for the creation of a new, tightly regulated supply chain for cannabis, in which producers are security cleared and federally licensed, while provinces and territories license and oversee distribution and sale. I want to highlight that under the proposed act, it will remain illegal to import into Canada or export from Canada cannabis and cannabis products unless exceptionally authorized by Health Canada. The Canada Border Services Agency and the RCMP will continue to work very closely together in conjunction with local police forces of the appropriate jurisdiction and internationally to uphold laws governing any cross-border movement of cannabis. It is important to note that as the bill moves through the legislative process, existing laws prohibiting possession and use of cannabis remain in place, and they need to be respected. This must be an orderly transition. It is not a free-for-all. Notre approche renouvelée contribuera à garder le cannabis hors de la portée de nos jeunes et mettre un frein au profit empoché par les criminels et à protéger la santé et la sécurité. Il nous tarde de travailler avec les organismes de l'application de la loi, nos partenaires provinciaux et territoriaux, les intervenants et tous les parlementaires afin d'améliorer le régime actuel. And that work will include the provision of support to help with the training of standard field sobriety testing and drug recognition experts, as well as the oral fluid screening devices. This is an effort that will involve the cooperation and engagement of a great many people, and we are determined to work hard with all of our partners to make it a successful improvement far beyond the status quo. Thank you. Diane.
Merci, Monsieur Goodale, ministre. Bonjour, Mesdames et Messieurs. Je vous remercie de vous joindre à nous. J'ai le plaisir d'être ici en compagnie de mes collègues pour annoncer que le gouvernement prend des mesures afin de réglementer rigoureusement le cannabis et d'en restreindre l'accès, ainsi que pour renforcer les lois sur la conduite avec les facultés affaiblies. Comme certains d'entre vous le savez déjà, je suis travailleuse sociale de formation. Au cours de ma carrière, j'ai été à même de constater que l'approche actuelle en matière de cannabis ne fonctionne pas. Dans le cadre de mon travail, j'ai œuvré dans des écoles secondaires de la Gaspésie et comme beaucoup de parents, j'ai constaté qu'il était plus facile pour un jeune de se procurer un joint illégalement dans une cour d'école plutôt que d'acheter des cigarettes. Il faut être capable de regarder la réalité en face et de reconnaître que l'approche actuelle ne protège pas nos jeunes. 21% des jeunes et 30% des jeunes adultes continuent à utiliser le cannabis à un taux parmi le plus élevé au monde. Ce cannabis est cultivé et vendu illégalement au profit des criminels et du crime organisé, sans égard à sa pureté, sa puissance ou sa provenance. Malheureusement, en ce moment, les principales sources de cannabis sont les criminels et le crime organisé dans son ensemble. En tant que travailleuse sociale de formation, mère de famille et grand-mère, je crois fermement qu'il est grand temps de prendre nos responsabilités pour protéger nos enfants et sortir l'argent des mains du crime organisé. Les mesures législatives annoncées aujourd'hui qui visent à légaliser le cannabis, le réglementer rigoureusement et en restreindre l'accès répondraient à ces objectifs. Elles imposeraient des sanctions pénales sévères aux personnes qui fournissent du cannabis aux jeunes créerait un marché légal et réglementé pour le cannabis afin d'enlever au crime organisé les bénéfices qu'il en tire et protégerait la santé des Canadiens en vertu d'exigences strictes visant à assurer la salubrité et l'intégrité du produit. Afin de protéger encore davantage les Canadiens, le gouvernement s'est engagé à adopter de nouvelles lois plus restrictives pour punir encore plus sévèrement les personnes qui conduisent avec les facultés affaiblies par le cannabis. La conduite avec les facultés affaiblies constitue la principale cause criminelle de décès et de blessures au Canada et la conduite avec les facultés affaiblies par la drogue est en hausse. Il y a quelques instants, la ministre Wilson-Raybould a expliqué comment son projet de loi proposé renforcerait les mesures législatives actuelles ayant trait à la conduite avec les facultés affaiblies par la drogue, créerait de nouvelles infractions dans ce domaine et rendrait nos lois actuelles régissant la conduite en état d'ivresse plus simples, plus cohérentes et plus faciles à appliquer. Le projet de loi proposé concernant le cannabis est informé par les recommandations du rapport final du groupe de travail sur la législation et la réglementation du cannabis, présidé par l'honorable Anne McLellan. À la lumière de leur large consultation à travers le pays, le groupe de travail a constaté que les Canadiens avaient de nombreuses préoccupations relatives à la facilité avec laquelle les jeunes peuvent se procurer du cannabis et à la possible augmentation de cas de conduite avec les facultés affaiblies par la drogue. Le projet de loi déposé aujourd'hui contribuerait grandement à répondre à ces préoccupations. Ce projet de loi est robuste et s'appuie sur la contribution d'experts dans les domaines de la santé, de la sécurité publique, de la justice et de l'application de la loi, ainsi que des points de vue exprimés par plus de 30 000 Canadiens. Dans les jours et les mois à venir, le gouvernement fédéral collaborera avec les provinces et les territoires, les municipalités et les groupes autochtones qui partagent avec nous la responsabilité de la mise en œuvre des lois et des règlements concernant le cannabis. Merci beaucoup.
Okay, I have 10 persons on my list right away. We have 20 minutes in front of us, and there's people on the teleconference. So I will ask you to be brief in your question, and if possible, be brief in the answer too. Precise, but brief. So, Catherine Collins, CBC.
When I look at the issues that you have not yet determined, so everything from pricing and taxation, the prospect of co-location with alcohol, I wonder whether or not you accept that the issues that you haven't worked out yet could determine the success or failure of this legislation. It seems to me there are many things you haven't decided that could still determine whether this works. I wonder if someone could answer that for me.
Well, maybe I can start. We have benefited greatly from a comprehensive report and recommendations from the task force that we took into account in terms of our legislation. Further to that, we have continued to have discussions, and moving forward, we'll have even more discussions with the provinces and territories to ensure that we're putting in place a comprehensive regime from seed to sale. We live in a country of cooperative federalism, and we have developed substantive relationships with our partners in the provinces and territories through examples like the around climate change, around CPP, and around health. So we're looking forward to the coming months in terms of continuing to further develop this relationship and supporting the provinces and territories in addressing those specific issues that you mentioned.
Well, do you accept, though, that there's a lot of important stuff missing from this legislation that still needs to be worked out?
If I may, Catherine, what we do accept is that there's important work yet to be done. And we also acknowledge the authority of the provinces and the roles that municipalities will play. And so that conversation has already begun, and certainly at the senior official level, we've spoken, and we recognize and acknowledge and respect the unique regional perspectives on many of these issues, but we're all committed. I will share with you, though, that as I've traveled across the country speaking to people about this, I have found an overwhelming consensus in every part of the country. We've got to do a better job protecting our kids. We want to keep our communities safe by getting organized crime out of this business and out of our communities, and we want to warrant and protect the health of Canadians. And so, based on that consensus, I'm very confident that we'll do what is necessary, working together to respond to those yet unresolved issues. But we also have the advice of science and expertise that we've tapped into and will continue to tap into so that we can have the best evidence-informed policy to achieve the things we set out to achieve.
Fanny Olivier, Radio-Canada.
J'aimerais qu'on parle d'échéancier. J'aimerais savoir si c'est toujours votre objectif. J'aimerais savoir si c'est toujours votre objectif de faire adopter la loi d'ici juillet 2018. Et qu'est-ce que vous allez faire si les provinces ne sont pas prêtes au bout de 6 mois à aller de l'avant?
If I may respond in English and then perhaps someone else in French, the current system of prohibition is failing our kids, and it's failing our communities, and it's putting all Canadians at risk, as they far too often are using an unregulated, untested, and unsafe product. And so we know we have a responsibility to act as expeditiously as we can. There's a great deal of work ahead of us, but at the same time, I think we all have an obligation to address the deficiencies in the current regime as expeditiously as possible, and so we can't drag our feet. We aspire to get this done as quickly as possible. We believe that by the end of June in 2018 is a reasonable time frame, and we undertake to work very, very judiciously and expeditiously with our partners in the provinces and municipalities to get the job done.
Je peux répondre peut-être rapidement en français avec ça, pour dire que, comme M. Blair a déjà dit, notre but ici est de protéger nos jeunes. Et il y a beaucoup de travail à faire et il faut le faire en collaboration avec les provinces, les territoires, les municipalités, les fournisseurs de soins de santé et plusieurs autres. Et tout en pensant des besoins des jeunes, des communautés pour les protéger. Et on a aussi pensé aux possibilités que peut-être il y aura des provinces qui n'auront pas de projet de loi avant l'introduction de la loi fédérale. Et dans ce cas-là, il y a une façon avec laquelle les personnes qui veulent acheter les produits légaux, il y a une façon de faire ça.
Vous avez prévu dans le budget à peu près 9 millions de dollars sur 5 ans en prévention. Est-ce que vous prévoyez plus d'argent pour la prévention et est-ce que vous prévoyez de l'argent pour aider les provinces qui devront faire probablement plus de contrôles routiers?
Bon, dans le projet de loi, il y a, comme j'ai dit, 9,5 millions de dollars pour l'éducation publique, mais il y a beaucoup d'autres façons avec lesquelles on soutenir les provinces et les territoires, avec les enjeux qui viennent de la consommation des substances. On vient de donner aux provinces 5 milliards de dollars pour la santé mentale et aussi plus que 100 millions de dollars pour la stratégie canadienne au sujet des drogues et des substances.
Christy Kirkup, CP.
Hi. I just wanted some clarity on packaging because the bill stipulates, for example, you can't have animals or images, can't advertise to children. It bars against packages having information about potency. Can they put fonts and colors on those packages? And if so, why?
And if I may, our intent is to make sure that we restrict access to kids, and we believe it's quite appropriate, as we've done with other substances, tobacco and even alcohol, in placing reasonable restrictions on the advertising that can be directed at kids. We're also, I want to be very clear, it is not our intent to promote the use of this drug. We want to permit through legalization and strict regulation more healthful, safer, and socially responsible use.
Can they put different fonts and colors on the front of the package, and if so, why?
So this piece of this bill introduces what will be legislation that will give authority to set in place regulations related to the specifics of what will be allowed in terms of packaging. And as Mr. Blair said, we will take lessons on that from other public health issues such as the
tobacco strategy.
Raymond Filion, TVA.
Has Canada consulted other countries, for example, the United States, about all the implications this new system will have or might have?
I can tell you, we did have the opportunity, working with the task force and also separately, in consulting with other jurisdictions who have gone down similar paths of legalization, Colorado and Washington in particular, but also other jurisdictions. Quite frankly, we tried to learn from their experience, and they were very generous in sharing their experience on things that they wish they could have done better. We've tried to apply those lessons, and I believe we've been very effective in recognizing what has been deficient and what caused difficulties in those jurisdictions. And our approach, I would also differentiate in a very significant way. In every other jurisdiction that has gone down the road of legalization, they focus primarily on a commercial regulatory framework. In Canada, we have taken a very different approach, and it's a public health framework. It has focused entirely on how to reduce the social and health harms associated to cannabis in its production, distribution, and consumption. And that focus, I think, enables us to avoid many of the pitfalls that other jurisdictions have experienced, where the focus was primarily on maximizing revenue.
But what about Canadians who travel to the States, for example, given the fact that marijuana is still illegal in most U.S. states? Have you obtained assurances from Washington that no Canadian who has consumed marijuana will be stopped at the border?
We've kept in very close touch with our nearest neighbor about this issue, as we do about all cross-border issues. The United States, of course, has the sovereign jurisdiction to deal with people crossing the border into their country, just as we have the same corresponding power for people crossing the border into Canada. Exporting and importing cannabis is now illegal, and it will continue to be illegal. We're providing the resources needed by the RCMP and by CBSA to enforce the law at the border, just as I'm sure Secretary Kelly will ensure that his agents on his side of the border have the resources necessary to enforce American law. It will be very important for people to understand that crossing the border with this product will be illegal.
Sorry, if you admit to a border agent right now that you've smoked pot, they can stop you from entering their country. What's going to happen once cannabis is legal?
Every sovereign country has the ability at the border to make those decisions for themselves. What we will expect of our American counterparts, just as they would expect it of us, that when people present themselves to cross the border, the experience is respectful, that it's consistent, that it's professional, and that people are not treated in any kind of a capricious way. If they are, then there are provisions whereby they can file a formal complaint with respect to their treatment that does not accord with the law.
Daniel Leblanc, Globe and Mail.
So a basic premise of everything you have said today is to remove the access of kids in schools to marijuana. What is the single most important measure in here that actually prevents a pusher who right now can bring marijuana into a school from doing the same thing in July 2018?
Daniel, if I may, it will remain. First of all, the production of cannabis outside of the regulated regime remains a serious criminal offense. Trafficking of cannabis outside of the regulated distribution system established in each of the provincial jurisdictions will remain a serious criminal offense. And this legislation, and I think this is directly to the point of your question, creates a new offense, a very serious offense, with a penalty of up to 14 years for trafficking cannabis to a youth. And as well, it also creates an additional offense for exploiting children in the trafficking of cannabis. Those measures are being put in place to recognize our very serious intent to do a better job of restricting access that kids have to this. Also by establishing the only legal means to obtain it in a highly regulated environment. The individuals that will be retailing and selling cannabis will know that there are serious consequences. They will be accountable for the decisions we make. And we believe from our experience in, for example, the retail of alcohol in this country, that by providing a highly regulated system of distribution, we can be much more successful, as we have been with alcohol. It's not an absolute guarantee kids won't get access to it, but it'll be far more difficult for kids to get access to it today, when this new regime is in place, than it is today. And today, the decision to sell or not to sell to that child is often being done by some gangster in a stairwell. And that's completely unacceptable to us, and that will be subject to serious criminal sanction.
Follow-up. Madame Philpott, Health Canada will continue to license every single legal producer of marijuana in this country, if I understand, beyond the 4 plants that people can grow at home. How will you ensure this is not corporate cannabis, only big companies? What's your intent in terms of the variety of producers that might be able to produce for this legal market?
Thank you for the question. I'm happy to report that over the last number of years, since we have developed a regulatory regime to license federal producers of cannabis for access to cannabis for medical purposes, Health Canada has developed a robust regulatory framework to accomplish those goals. We have, in fact, the best such system in the world. We are visited on a regular basis by countries around the world who want to see how we have done this in a way that is meets the criteria that others have spoken to today, to make sure that the people who are in the production business have been absolutely vetted to recognize the security needs of those systems, to make sure that there are processes for inspection, etc. And we will put in place the ability to expand those the number of companies who can develop these licenses. Your concern that you alluded to in terms of the size of these systems, I will tell you now that every one of the 41 licensed producers who are currently producing legal access to cannabis for medical purposes now are small businesses, all of them with less than 100 employees in those businesses, and it would be our goal to obviously let the market continue to influence the development of this industry in a way that would allow businesses of both small and large size to develop, but also to be done within those strict regulatory frameworks.
Estelle, le devoir.
Hi. The bill says that it'll be legal to possess up to 30 grams if you're a minimum of 18 years old, and provinces will decide where they want to sell it. How do we know that provinces will actually follow your lead on this and not, you know, allow 0.5 grams for over 55-year-olds? One province or a group of provinces could say, screw it, we're not doing it.
Can I just share with you my experience, as I've had quite a bit of discussion in all of the provinces and territories, and as I've already alluded, there's an overwhelming consensus that we need to do a better job of protecting our kids and getting organized crime out of this business, and we recognize that in order to take organized crime's influence out of this market, we're going to have to be not only to maintain strict criminal sanctions for their activities, but to provide a new regulated regime for production and distribution, which is competitive in price, quality, and access. And there's a wide acknowledgement in all of the provinces of the goal of getting organized crime out of this business. It'll make our communities safer. And so I'm very confident that we'll work together in finding a reasonable resolution in order to achieve our mutual goal of making our community safer.
I will say that the bill is permissive to the provinces and territories to be able to reflect the specific factual situations within their jurisdictions. But again, this goes back to, as the parliamentary secretary said, this is something that we are going to work with the provinces and territories collaboratively to develop a broad, coordinated regime. And certainly if provinces were to go towards the end that you referenced in terms of elevating the age to 55, there would be other challenges in that regard if that was the case. I mean, we are wanting to and providing, if this piece of legislation goes through, access to a legalized form of cannabis. And again, we're going to continue to work with the provinces and territories in order to assist them.
What do you mean when you say there would be other challenges? And then my real follow-up, but I would like you to expand on that. And then my follow-up, Mr. Goodale, is you were not super reassuring to Raymond Fillion's question about what happens to someone who crosses the border and admits that he did something legal in Canada, which is to smoke pot, starting next year. Doesn't sound like you got any reassurance. Should these people just lie at the border?
No one should lie at the border. In fact, under the laws of both countries, you're obliged to tell the truth when you're speaking to a border services officer. But the fact of the matter is that each country establishes its own rules. If there appears to be a pattern of examination at the border that just does not accord with appropriate, professional, reliable, consistent conduct, then obviously that's the sort of thing that we would raise at a governmental level to make sure people are treated appropriately. The laws of the United States are the responsibility of the laws of the United States, and the laws of Canada are the responsibility of Canada. But I would point out that there are a number now of American states that either have already legalized cannabis or are in the process of doing so. And I think in our discourse with the Americans, we will be able to make the very strong point that the regime we're setting up in Canada will better protect our kids and better stop the flow of illegal dollars to organized crime. Our system will actually be the better one.
That if the age is so high, there would be challenges like
Well,
what?
I mean, as with any law that's brought in by any government, individuals could challenge that law due to its unfairness. The federal government in this proposed bill will, where provinces and territories do not enter the space, be responsible and will be responsible for providing access to legalized form of cannabis. As I said, in any jurisdiction where a law is passed that a citizen deems unfair, we have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
We have just a few minutes left, so and I have 4 names on my list, so we'll see. Can we stretch a bit? Glenn McGregor, CTV.
Minister Wilson-Raybould, on the drunk driving, new drunk driving provisions that remove the requirement for a police officer to have suspicion before requiring a breath test. Did you check, and with whom, to see if that would be charter compliant? There seems to be a lot of online reaction to that from the legal community, saying that they're raising questions about whether that would actually be legal or would be challenged on the constitutionality of it. If you could just talk to that point.
Sure, I'm very pleased to address that question. We have with this bill, if it passes Parliament, will be one of the strongest impaired driving pieces of legislation in the world, and I'm very proud of that. Ensuring that we have safety on our roads and our highways is of paramount concern. I will, as I do with all justice pieces of legislation, be tabling a charter statement. I am confident of the constitutionality of the mandatory roadside testing. This is not a device or a tool that does not exist in other places in the world. In fact, mandatory roadside testing in many countries has significantly reduced the number of deaths on our highways, and I think that is of paramount public concern and of paramount concern to put forward good policy and legislation to address it. We have, and I've had discussions with Mothers Against Drunk Driving, for example, that very much support this step, and I look forward to being able to table my charter statement, and I'm confident in the justifiability or of this provision within the bill.
Was there consideration of how it would affect visible minorities, given that they get pulled over at a much higher rate than other people?
Well, in terms of police officers pulling people over for the reasons that they can legally, that is the premise of this piece of legislation, and no matter whom is sitting in the driver's seat, they are enabled to ask for the roadside test.
I got 4 minutes extra, so Tonda McCharles. So be short, please, for your other
Just to go back
colleagues.
to the pricing and taxes question, leaving pricing up to the provinces, I guess, or regulations around that. Is that correct? But taxes, as per federal taxes, you will at the very least collect GST on these kinds of sales, will you not? And do you have an estimate of what that is?
And if I may, our focus has been on reducing those social and health harms. I've already articulated those.
But impact assessment done on this proposed
We
rule,
also,
so-
we also recognize the importance of price in order to compete effectively and reduce the influence of organized crime in the marketplace. The determination of price is going to have a number of different factors and considerations, and it's part of an ongoing discussion with provinces and with producers in order to make sure that the price is appropriate.
But specifically about federal tax revenue, are you committing to not federally taxing these sales, or are you in fact going to collect GST?
Ce que je peux vous dire actuellement, c'est qu'il y a des discussions qui sont en cours. On a 15 mois devant nous pour travailler le dossier, puis on va vous informer au fur et à mesure de ce qui va se passer au niveau des taxes. Il y a aussi du travail à faire avec les provinces, mais les 15 prochains mois vont vraiment nous servir à établir tout ce qui touche la taxation. Mais le but premier du programme, puis de ce qu'on met en place, c'est vraiment de protéger nos jeunes, puis de sortir le crime organisé du marché.
Je voudrais savoir, I'd like to know then, just to go to, is there any commitment on any federal revenue being put back into public education, research, or addictions treatment?
Typically, the Minister of Finance, and I have some recollection of that, the Minister of Finance never ties certain revenues to certain programs. Revenues come into the general fiscal treasury, and then Cabinet, the Minister of Finance, and the Prime Minister determine the allocation of those revenues. But the issues that you have raised with respect to addictions and prevention measures, making sure police have the proper tools and training to do what they need to do, all of those are high priorities for us as we proceed with the implementation. Many of them will require discussion with the provinces because there are joint roles to be played here. But very clearly, we recognize our obligation to make sure that this regime is properly financed and properly supported to make sure it is effective and get to the main objectives. Keep it out of the hands of our kids and make sure we've stopped the flow of illegal cash to organized crime.
2 minutes, c'est tout.
Pour le processus parlementaire, est-ce que vous attendez à des obstacles au Sénat? L'échéancier a l'air serré. Il y a beaucoup d'obstacles encore à venir. Peut-être, Mme Philpott, pensez-vous vraiment que c'est réaliste de s'en aller vers un échéancier d'ici juillet 2018?
Bon, comme on a déjà discuté, c'est un projet de loi qui est très important pour la santé des Canadiens, pour la protection de nos jeunes. Et on espère que tous les députés et les sénateurs vont travailler avec nous, vont faire de bonnes collaborations pour que le projet de loi continue aussi rapidement que possible.
Quand voudriez-vous que les provinces aient un régime en place? C'est quoi le scénario idéal pour la vente et la distribution?
Vous voulez pour moi? On espère que... On attend que probablement il y aura des différences entre des provinces et des territoires. Il y en a qui sont prêts et qui ont déjà commencé leur discussion au sujet de ça. Il y aura des autres qui peut-être vont attendre un peu. On espère qu'ils continuent encore aussitôt que possible. Et sinon, on a des régimes, on a une façon pour que les Canadiens puissent avoir l'accès pour un produit légal.
Merci beaucoup et pour votre disponibilité. Au revoir.